Okay. Um, hey Luke, are you here? I know you're under your wife's handle.
Luke just joined.
Hey guys, sorry. I'm on my wife's laptop, so I have to figure out this Mac thing. I'm a Windows guy.
You're on your wife's laptop.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
because
should we
mine's pretty
like
terrible. Mic and everything. So
should we like start?
You can give up to you.
All right, I'll give
We're
it
gonna
like just
we're gonna record most of this, Victoria, Luke. We're gonna record most of this on YouTube and all that kind of stuff too. So
let me try to should I move to a different location then, or is my background okay? So you can tell I have a newborn, so it's like full of baby stuff everywhere.
hey, congrats, man.
Thank you.
oh yeah, congratulations.
Thanks. It's awesome. It's like a cuter, better, only good times kind of startup.
Is it a he, she,
Oh
look
yeah,
like you?
it's a boy. Looks
Okay.
kind of like me, but looking more like his mom every day. So
Is that a good thing?
yeah, I mean, could be better, I could have a bit of me more, but it is what it is. He definitely looks like me a bit. So
Okay. Okay, cool. I think we'll kind of like kick it off. So thank you everyone for joining. I'll just give a quick like brief on like what to expect. So for this event, we actually have two additional speakers. So Hsu Ken is like our mainstay. I have managed to beg and get Victoria and Luke on as speakers. They have their own startups. They'll introduce themselves after this. We're basically gonna dedicate around like 30 to 35 minutes for like a panel discussion of sorts. I curated some questions. We'll also have like a hot take section at the end, just to like get uh, you know, the speakers like takes on some controversial statements on finding co-founders. And at the end, we'll kind of open everything up for Q&A. So that's when you guys are free to shine. During the whole thing though, feel free to kind of just blow up the chat section. I'm gonna like keep tabs on that. So feel free to ask any questions, anything you have in the chat section. Please reserve all Q&A like for later on. I promise we'll make time for that. So okay, with that out of the way, thank you, Victoria, Luke, and again for joining us. Victoria, do you want to kick us off by just introducing yourself, your company, what you do, things like that?
Sure. So I'm Victoria. I was part of Iterative's cohort, I think almost a year ago, or exactly a year ago. So it's been a while. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BeautyBuddy. I have one co-founder, Pia, who is behind me, but she's shy because she's not camera ready. So you could just wave at her from behind. Yeah, happy to be here and talk about how much I love my co-founder and some advice on how to find one that you actually love rather than otherwise.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Hey, Luke, you're up next.
sure thing. No, thanks for the invite, Madhu, and so you can always get to contribute to Iterative and like whatever we can do for the community. So I'm Luke. I'm the co-founder of Coverio.xyz. Um, I have a co-founder, Zhan, who's from Kazakhstan. We're from different countries. I'm Filipino. We met in Singapore, and I'd love to kind of tell you about how that relationship developed. A lot of it, honestly, is because of our wives who connected us, but how that relationship evolves over time from acquaintances to friends to co-founders, what it's like to kind of navigate the ups and downs of startups, and some of like the practices we've kind of realized are really helpful in terms of building not just a good relationship with each other, but making sure that it continues to be good.
That's awesome, Luke. All right, we're gonna skip Hsu Ken because everybody knows Hsu Ken, very famous. So we're gonna skip him first. But I'd love to kind of like get into the thick of things right away. And like, Luke, you kind of mentioned, that you had a little experience picking a co-founder and you kind of hinted at, hey, there are certain things you should look for, kind of avoid. So I want to like kind of kick it off by asking you, Luke, again, right? Which is like, are there certain attributes that, you particularly look for when finding co-founder that you suggest other people look for? And then well, I'll kind of like bounce that question to Victoria and Hsu Ken next.
Sure. So for context, even though Coverio was like my first startup, I actually tried to start a lot of companies in the university. And I had a lot of friends, and we all wanted to do a startup. None of them took off. Everything failed for whatever reason. And so I do have experience picking co-founders because, at one point in time, we all thought we'd make it big and we'd be like the next Mark Zuckerbergs. So I think attributes are one thing, but I remember clearly that one thing that we did as a founding team, me and Zhan, at the very beginning, was to sit down and sort of talk about what core values we want our company to have. So I'm sure everybody knows this, but it really is very true. You need to have the right core values as founders, because that extends to the rest of your company. And the way we did it was very simple. We were like, okay, what are things that you kind of wish you had in your previous jobs? So for us, one of them was like high ownership. We want people to actually be like owners and not renters, because we're giving them equity. They got to act like owners, right? And we had like a lot, like 5. We ended up with 5 that we thought were really key. And I think that's when we realized, like, okay, if we can agree on core values and what we need to have, like as founders, and what our team should have, I think the rest can figure itself out. So it will vary for everyone. Like you'll have different styles of management, different type of people, but in general, core values have to be, kind of aligned. So for us, things like ownership, like brutally honest transparency, like things like keeping talent density high, being frugal with money and not spending it on stupid things, and building a product that people love. Those 5 core values were like, things that we wanted to stick to. So I think, Zhan and I are very different people. I'm very aggressive. I'm very keen to speak my mind. Zhan is like much more calmer. He's able to hold back the reins a bit. We have a really good balance, and he's a great friend. So I don't think you need to have attributes specifically. I think it's more about value alignment than anything else.
That's awesome. Victoria, I'm gonna go to you next. Like, what's your opinion on this?
Well, similar to what Luc said, right? So I think same thing before we started BeautyBuddy. I had a lot of other ideas with other friends, and I think most of them didn't work out because one, again, with the core values, same, we just didn't mesh, but also on working style. So an example of this is there was one friend I had, and we thought we had the perfect idea. But when we were about to start it, she took a long time trying to plan everything out. She wanted everything to be perfect before we could execute. And I would be like on the edge, like, come on, no, let's just do it. Like let's do all these things and then let's see what sticks. She's like, no, we must do this step by step. So that never moved past step 1, because by step 2, I was like, this is way too slow for me. I can't work with you. Let's move on. So I think one of the best things about PNI is that our working styles are very complementary in many different ways, which I think I'll mention on later.
Cool. And Hsu Ken, you've kind of done this rodeo many times with the same person.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess it's kind of weird in my case, because it's like I haven't actually like looked for co-founders for such a long time, because I basically have the same co-founder for like the whole time, which is Brian, my co-founder at Iterative. And we honestly we just benefited from like dumb luck. Like we were like young and just like had kind of met, and he was like kind of the only person that like wanted to start a company and was serious about it. And so I was just like, well, he's serious, so like we should be co-founders. And we had no conversations about values and no conversations about attributes. We had none of that. And to be clear for everybody here, do what they did, do not do what I did. What I did is complete blind luck. Like that should not have happened, right? And it was worse because that first company was actually Brian and his younger brother, and then me and my younger brother. And I became a co-founder with Brian's younger brother, and I hadn't even met him yet. Literally, we're having a conversation. Brian's like, my brother is an engineer. Can he be a co-founder? And I'm like, yeah, sure. like, so it was all kind of like bad. If I look back though at kind of like what has kept Brian and I kind of working together, I mean, sorry to be a broken, it's exactly what they're talking about. Brian and I are not the same. We don't like the same stuff. We don't appreciate the same things. We don't even really consider ourselves friends. If you like ask him, he's like, is Hsu Ken your friend? He's going to say no. And the things that really kept us together was we just have the same values. Like that's really what it is. we both are internally motivated and we're not externally motivated. And so like startups was never kind of like all about money for us, for example. Brian is incredibly cheap. I am not as cheap, but he is incredibly cheap. And so it's just like everything we do is just like, we're kind of quite frugal about it. And I think we care a lot about like why people kind of do stuff, and we invest in people and kind of like all of these kinds of things. And so I think the primary thing that, even though it was dumb luck that kind of got us together, the thing that kind of kept us together was just like values. I'm not married yet, but the thing this is the sad part of my life, is Brian is probably the most significant like adult relationship I have, which is just embarrassing and sad. But in some ways it's kind of like a marriage, in the sense that like you kind of, I mean, this is what I hear, is that you should get married kind of like on shared values, not because you like the same music, right? And I think it's the like same way for like co-founders.
That's awesome. So what I'm kind of hearing a lot of is, I think, shared values, and Victoria also mentioned like working styles. So I want to kind of just take the opposite end of like the question, which is, what do you think most people end up over-optimizing for when looking for co-founders, which they shouldn't? And are there any like early warning signs that you have personally, right, in your own experiences, or now that you think back to your experiences, that you should kind of be like, okay, this is an indication that this relationship may not work out? I'll start with like Victoria.
Yeah, so I would say optimizing for skill sets, right? I think this one, Pia and I have a lot of experience being told, hey, you guys have almost the same skill set. You should find another co-founder. And I think early on, this was heavily highlighted by the investors we spoke to. A lot of them said, you know what, find yourself a technical co-founder. You're starting a tech company. You're both non-technical, so let's talk when you find a technical co-founder. And I think it was Hsu Ken who actually gave us the confidence to stop looking for a technical co-founder. When we got interviewed for Iterative, he was like, oh yeah, you guys don't just hire a CTO down the line, like don't think about that yet. So I think that gave Pia and I the confidence to go forward. And now,
Victoria, was that good advice or bad advice, you think?
I think it was excellent advice,
Okay.
because so before you told us that, we looked for a technical co-founder and everyone had red flags. So we were almost at that point where we were going to settle with someone like we only hated a little, which was not a good thing. But later down the line, we found that, you know what, the values and the, I guess, our being complementary was worth more, because now Pia, because she really has the willingness and being hardworking she read like 30 product books, and I think she could well be your CTO at this point, that we didn't really need a co-founder in the start. And I think how our company grew from then on shows that we didn't need a technical co-founder.
Sorry, maybe let me jump in here, Madhu, because I worked with them during the batch, and so I kind of like know a bit of the story. And you know, if you guys were spending time looking for a CTO, you know, when I remember when we were working together the batch, the first thing I told you to do was basically like start getting customers, right? And so I think sometimes when you're looking at for co-founders, and investors sometimes give you horrible advice, me included. It's sometimes people get preoccupied with the things that kind of are like not holding them back in their startup, and so they get like, I think Victoria and Pia kept hearing from investors that they need to get CTOs. And so they were spending all this time trying to get CTOs, right? And actually hadn't gotten any customers or users yet, right? And so I think when we started kind of working in the batch, and when they stopped looking for a CTO, then they started working on getting customers. And then they started getting a lot of customers. And I won't say on this call, but I read your recent monthly update, and you guys have like a bunch of bookings and customers now. And guess what? It's way easier to get a CTO when you have a bunch of customers and users now, right? And you get better CTOs and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know, I just wanted to highlight for people, sometimes people think of like, you need to find a certain type of co-founder, a CTO, or I don't know, somebody who you think can fundraise, or whatever CTO you think you have in your, like whatever co-founder you think you need in your head. And sometimes it just keeps people from actually like starting their startup, which is getting users and getting customers, which is almost always kind of like a better place to be anyway. And so anyway, I just wanted to like call that out because I remember that part of the story.
So, I mean, since you kind of like jumped in,
That's
is
a
there
very,
something
very
you do
useful.
regularly?
Very good advice. Thank you, Ken.
Hey, Nam, we'll keep the questions to the end and all that. Sorry, we're kind of
Thank you.
recording, so we're trying to like
Yes,
make
yes.
it clean.
Sure.
Sorry, Marty, what were you gonna say?
Yeah. So, I mean, you've kind of like seen so many batches of like companies at this point. So even you have like second, third hand experience in this. Is there like two or three things people routinely kind of over-optimize for, which they shouldn't? And any early warning signs that this relationship might not work out?
I think, I mean, I feel like maybe at Iterative, we just like invest in people who just like think like us, which is probably true. I mean, I would say the same thing as Victoria in the sense that I think people over-optimize for skill set sometimes. Not to say that it's like not important, right? All else equal, it's like good to have kind of like different skill sets, but I would choose shared values over skill sets, complementary skill sets any day of the week, right? And to kind of like echo what Victoria was saying, when Brian and I first met, we were like, like 9 months out of school, we basically had no skills. And so, especially if you're really early in your career, like we were coming out of school, you like think you have skills, you don't actually have any skills. And so Brian and I had no skills other than like, we were like very curious and we were willing to work hard. And now we have actually quite complementary skills, in part because we kind of got together kind of like so early and developed complementary skills as we need to get along, just like I feel like Victoria and Pierre are kind of like now doing, right? And so I think just the skill set, I think just sometimes people kind of like over-optimize for that. It's a good thing to think about, but like shared values over complementary skills any day of the week. Shared values like non-negotiable to me. So I think there's that piece. Red flags. I think red flags are things like Victoria's kind of like talking about. So Victoria was like, hey, somebody wants to make kind of perfect version products. Victoria wants to kind of get stuff out. If somebody is like okay, this may be unpopular. I remember somebody once when I got to Singapore, they wanted to start a company with me. And so my friend introduced me, they wanted to start a company with me. And he showed up to the coffee place in a Ferrari. And when he pulled up in the Ferrari, I was like, nope, it's not for me. Nothing wrong with people with Ferraris, all good, whatever. Not my people, right? I wouldn't drive a Ferrari. Okay, I don't know if I can afford a Ferrari, but like I wouldn't, even if I could, wouldn't drive a Ferrari, not a thing that I care about. And so even something like that was just like, I just had kind of like a different kind of like take on like what I would kind of like want, right? And so to me, that was like an external, internal motivation thing. I think I talked to some people and it's like, we're like talking about, sometimes it's like when you talk to the people who you're thinking about kind of starting companies with, and you can kind of see where the conversation goes. Like I've had some conversations with people where they're like, we're like talking about, I'm a product guy. Like I want to talk about the problem. I want to talk about the users. And I remember talking to some people when they're like, they're just talking about who we could sell to later. I'm like, yo, we don't have a user yet. Like I'm not starting a company with anybody that talks about who we're selling it to. Like, and to be kind of clear, Brian and I have actually never had that conversation. Even when we've sold companies, we like didn't have the conversation until like it came up. And so I think there's just these things where you're like trying to get a feel for like what these values are. And the thing that I kind of always dig into is like, why do people do the things that they do? So like, if you're looking to start a company with somebody, like you should ask them, like, why do you want to start a startup? Right? Like, why do you want to do this? It's kind of a horrible experience, if I'm being honest, right? And it's like, it's brutal. So like, why do you want to do this? Why is this interesting to you? Like, why do you want to work on this problem? I think ask a lot of the like why questions and why people kind of do it. And I think that will be quite helpful.
Thanks, Hsu Ken, for that. Yeah, I think that kind of like touches on the like shared value thing as well, quite a fair bit. Luc, do you have any experience with this? Red flags that relationship might not work out, things you feel like people over-index on?
Sure. No, I think the shared values is definitely, thing to look out for. You got to do that. You got to have that. Skills, I agree. Like we kind of like overvalue that for a really specific reason. My theory is that because a lot of VCs will tell you like, oh, I need proof that your team can build a product, which is like, okay, you need to have a CTO. That's like they kind of summarize that need into a very simple sounding like advice, like do this and you got it. But actually, like if you think about it, there's so many no code, low code tools now. You don't actually need a CTO to build an early MVP and get, wait list, get customers, whatever. And I think that's something we learned iterative too. It was like, hey, think about an MVP that's super simple, doesn't take too much time. You can do it yourself. You launch that's a product. You have a wait list that's like distribution, right? And so I think shared skill sets or like complementary skill sets make sense in the sense that you have to be able to build a product and get it to distribute it. Like you have to be able to sell it, right? But you don't necessarily need to have a CTO. So I think that's where like the intention of VCs and what they actually say completely like doesn't make sense. Like it doesn't connect. I think red flags definitely is motivations. Like the why is very important. Like I remember when I was in university, I was thinking like, dude, I'm gonna be rich, I'm gonna be a billionaire. If I had known like how tough being a founder is, you would realize like, dude, you cannot be motivated by money. You cannot. It just won't work. There's no amount of greed that can make going through hell worth it. It's just not. Of course, I like the great points about being a founder, but the why has to be there. If you're meeting with someone, they're like, I want to be rich, I want to like be my own boss, then you're like, okay, this person doesn't understand what it's actually like to be a founder. It's not what they think, right? And sort of having that clarity of expectation is very important. Like you have to be able to manage people's expectations. It's like, hey man, you do know that we don't have an HR person, right? You're gonna have to like fill up contracts. You do know we don't have a finance manager. You're gonna have to send out salaries. Oh yeah, like it's April, we have to file taxes. You do know that's your job, right? I'm gonna be, I don't know, creating our logo. I'm going to be like setting up our company. I'll be like handling whatever. So I think expectations, not just the why part, is super important. If people have bloated expectations of what it's like to be a founder, then you got to be like, yeah, they probably don't realize enough of what it's like, and they're probably just going to be let down by the experience.
Let me add a little bit to kind of what Luc is saying, because I think an important part of this is like, your co-founder, out of anybody you work with at your company, your co-founder is the one where you need to not be worried that they're going to jump ship or leave when things get bad. They're the only person in the company where you're like, you need to just be like rock solid, this person's going to stick around. So the first, okay, I don't know how you want to categorize the first company, but the first company that was Decide.com that Brian and I kind of started, we started it with our college professor. And he came on kind of like later. And this college professor had previously sold a startup to Microsoft for like 200 million or something like that in like 2005. And he was like a professor and he was like super famous and all this stuff. And we met him when we first wanted to start a company. And we basically told him our idea. And he's like, your idea is really bad. Here's why it's not going to work. And we said, thank you very much. We're going to do it anyway. And then it didn't work for exactly the reasons he said. And 2 years later, we went back to his office and we said, okay, we got new ideas. And we told him about the new ideas and he thought they were more interesting. And he eventually kind of came on as a co-founder and he was like part of the company and all this stuff. And years later, I was at his wedding and I asked him, I said, why did you work with us? We were four kids, we were kids who had just spent 2 years in a basement getting absolutely nowhere. Like, it wasn't that like, oh, maybe we weren't going anywhere. We had just shown you that we got nowhere. You had sold this company for $200 million. You could work with anybody. Why did you work with us? And he leaned back and he said, I have a lot of people who come ask me to work with them on a startup. And most of those people, I don't think they're going to cut it. Their stuff's going to get rocky and they're going to jump ship, right? And with you guys, what I had was these kids who came to my office wide-eyed and so excited to start a startup. And you guys basically had abject failure for 2 years. And 2 years later, you show back in my office and you guys were just as excited about starting a company as you were 2 years before. And I said, I don't know if these guys are any good, but they're not going to jump ship, right? And so I can work with this. Like, I know how to do startups. I will teach these guys how to do startups. But the thing I can't teach them is, are they going to stick around? And these guys have already stuck around and they're kind of like still doing it. And so I think that was the whole reason he kind of like worked with us. So much so that actually there were VCs that we talked to when we were fundraising that told him he should ditch us. Like the VCs told him, was like, yo, your like cap table doesn't make sense. You're the more valuable one. Just like ditch these guys. We'll like fund the new entity, like get them off your cap table. Like, why have these like 4 college like kids on your like cap table, right? And like significant, founder kind of level stuff. And he didn't do it. He told us afterwards. He was like, yeah, I won't name names, but he was like, yeah, these investors wanted you guys out. These investors wanted you guys out, this kind of stuff. And I just wouldn't do it. And so I think that's something that to kind of like check with co-founders as you're kind of like talking to people and stuff is like, do you just think this person is going to stick around? Like, and when things get bad, are they going to stick around? And I'm going to tell you right now, things are going to get bad. And for people who haven't been a founder yet, when I say things are going to get bad, whatever your images of your head of like what you think that is worse than that, right? Like it's worse than that. And so you just need somebody who is going to be like, you want to quit, and you can like turn over and look at the other person, and you're like, all right, like this is where we're at, this is what we got to do. And so I think that's a kind of a really important piece. I don't know if that's a shared value thing. That's just like a grit thing, I feel like. So I don't know.
I 100%
I think that's like a
agree.
good. Sorry,
Yeah,
Luc,
for
go
sure.
ahead.
100% agree. No, sorry, Madu. I was just gonna say, like thinking back to like the startups I started in university, inevitably they failed because someone quit and left. And you know, when you have a co-founder dispute or like someone leaves the team at that early stage, it's like there's nothing you can do. Like you have to pull a monumental effort to make up for that one loss. And yeah, you definitely go through really bad stuff as a founder, no matter how good things get. And like one thing I really appreciate by Zhan, like about Zhan, is like for me as the more fiery personality in a relationship, like I will have swings of like elation and also like, dude, this is like not working out. I don't know what to do. And he's like, yeah, but we'll figure it out. And that's just so valuable. Like I can't impress. I wish I could impress upon everyone here how important that sort of voice is, and that stability, like knowing like no matter what happens, we'll fight to the very last cent that we have in our bank account. Like you need that as a baseline. That like I agree with Hsu Ken. It's not even shared values. Like you need that grit from the very beginning. If you don't have that, shared values is like you've built a solid foundation on quicksand. So yeah.
I also think that this screening for motivation at the very start also plays a part into it, right? So I've met founders who want to join a startup because maybe for the money, like what Hsu Ken said, some maybe create their own startups for the clout. I'm not sure if I'm using that word correctly. I have Gen Z colleagues now, and they've taught me the word clout. And then there's some who really just want to, solve the problem that they're seeing in front of you. And if your co-founder is doing it for the clout and you're trying to solve problems, the way you're, oh, thank you, the way you're going to build your company and the way you're going to continue on, I think depends entirely on that. And if, for example, you are solving a problem, but you guys have not gotten on the cover of Forbes, your co-founder is going to bounce, or he's just going to shut off and be like, let me find a startup where I can be on Forbes. So I think motivation at the start, we really do have to screen for that and make sure that you both have the same motivation moving forward.
This is, I think, like a great way to like segment to the next thing I wanted to ask you guys about. Just we talked a lot about the what, like, okay, what matters. Let's talk about like the how. It almost seems like there's layers, right? So like grit is like base level. You need to have this before you move on. And then there's probably shared values, other things. So how does one actually have this conversation, with somebody else? Like what are the, I think let's put it as top three topics you'd bring up when you're trying to have like a conversation with a potential co-founder. So some things that, people might talk about as goals, motivations, shared values. That's one. It could also be working styles, how people react to stress, communication. Could even be finances, right? Like how much runway does somebody have? It could also be risk-taking ability. Like, hey, are we gonna take like 20 really risky bets? Or are we gonna take like 5 medium-sized bets? What are like I think the top three things that you typically want to like talk about when you meet somebody as a potential co-founder? Victoria, let's go with you.
Oh, top three is tough. I would say first, I would ask my co-founder what would make her or him, what would make them kind of think of our startup as a failure, right? So if at the beginning, and she already sees like, you know what, if we don't get 100 customers in a month, this is a failure, I'm out. That's a huge red flag. Or if down the line, we do not get investments and she sees that as a failure, well, I just want to work harder and get that investment down the line, and she sees that. So that's also kind of red flag. So that's number one thing I'd ask. Other two, maybe
Victoria, I'm curious, what did you talk to Pia about? I mean, you had these conversations. Like, what did you guys actually talk about? And you guys knew each other before, right? So like, but knowing somebody and then being like, we should start a company together are kind of different. Like, how did you broach that? Were you like, hey, Pia, we should start a company together? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so when P and I started BeautyBuddy or came up with the idea, we both had full-time jobs. And how we decided to dive into BeautyBuddy was one day we were watching this really horrible movie. It's called Amelia on Netflix, if you want to see it. And we had one too many gin and tonics, and we decided to, let's just brainstorm some ideas. And while we were doing that, I think one of us segued into like, hey, let's book a salon appointment. And then the others were like, oh yeah, that's such a pain in the ass. Blah, blah, blah. So one thing that really struck with me on why I should do this with Pia is because number one, she understood the industry that the problem was in, and she also experienced the problem firsthand. So I think interest-wise, that's number one. Second would be the commitment. So I was willing to leave my full-time job for this, but was she? And the fact that she did, even though she had the offer to be relocated to the HQ in another country, and she was all set. She was supposed to leave the month after, and she said, you know what, no, like I believe in this more. F that, I'll go do this thing with you. I think that big commitment really showed that this was gonna evolve into something bigger with her.
It sounds like commitment is like the probably like the biggest thing of all.
Yeah.
And you brought up something interesting, which is like, at what point would that person give up? I think was your first point. And
Yeah.
I never really considered that. That's like a good like bar, I think, for commitment as well. Hey, Luke, like I think same question. Like, what are like your top three things you look for in, and what was the conversation with Zhan? I mean, I know a little bit of the backstory. You guys were introduced by your wife.
Yeah. So for context, my wife is from Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan. His wife is from Kazakhstan, which is like a neighboring country. And in Singapore, there's like this small community of Central Asian people. And so my wife and Zhan's wife met up, and then they were like, "Hey, we should do like a double date sort of dinner." And I hate double dates, but I was like, "Fine, if you really think we should do that, we should do that." So I went there. I was like really not expecting anything, and just I think hearing their stories was very striking to me. So I think with regards to grit, right? I think you can pretty much find that out if you hear what sort of life a person's been through. And so for people like myself who born and raised in Manila, not very rich family, that sort of thing, he was probably able to say like, oh, he actually went through a lot of trouble and a lot of hardship to get to where he is. And the same for him, like, coming from Kazakhstan, going to Malaysia, going to Singapore, really just chasing a dream and like, not, I wouldn't say YOLOing it, but really, making bets on what he wants to do with his life. And so that kind of made me realize like, hey, this person has ambition. This person has grit because he's gone through a lot. And he's someone that I think if we like told our stories over a beer, he'd be like, yeah, been there, done that. And it's like almost like, having another soldier in a foxhole with you. You can recognize like, yeah, this person can has been through things. And so for me, like I don't know if that's too extreme of an example, but I definitely do screen for people's stories because I think people who've kind of had it too easy don't really understand, the depths of where human emotion can take you when things are really tough. And when they have, and they're still like, out on the other side, then you're like, okay, maybe there's like something like there's like co-founder material here. I mean, that's for me, that's how I think about things.
I love that, like having the shared kind of experience almost, and kind of just understanding where the other person's coming from. I Yeah, I feel like that's almost like a vibe, right? Like you instantly vibe with the other person. You're like, yeah, 100% get it. So again, I know this is probably like a little different for you and Brian, but what did you guys even talk about anything, or were you guys like? I know you're a coffee shop story every Sunday.
Yeah, I think it's how do we kind of like vet like whether this is the right like person? Is that the question?
Yeah, like how, like what did you talk to Brian about? When you guys were deciding to do it, like start a company.
Yeah, again, I mean, all of my actual stories of how Brian and I got together is just like an example of like what everybody should not do. So let's just be very clear up front. Yeah, so the story that Madhu was kind of alluding to was, I think I was similar to probably like Luke, where I had tried to start a bunch of other companies with friends before I met Brian. like over and over, actually. And if anybody's heard the like famous Jack Ma story of like him getting people to come to his living room and kind of like get them to start Alibaba with him and whatever, I did that many times. I invited lots of friends to my house and be like, we should start a startup. And I think the thing that happened was I like got several batches of friends, actually. Like I got all the smart friends in one batch, which I won't say who were in that first batch because they were the top choices. And I was like, we should start a startup. And look, everybody says they want to start a startup, right? Everybody says they want to start a startup. They're like, yeah, we should start a startup. And then we all have dreams about being billionaires. And after that, and I would say, okay, next Sunday, let's spend the entire afternoon working on the startup, right? And so I say, okay, let's meet at this coffee shop and we can work at the startup. And so I would go to the coffee shop and I would wait, and nobody would show up. Like I would just keep getting text message after text message. I'm like 15 minutes late. People are messaging me. They're like, hey, I'm not coming. 30 minutes late. Oh, I'm not coming. And literally it'd be a group of like 5 or 6 people and like nobody would show up. And I would just be sitting in this coffee shop by myself. And this happened several times with several batches of people, right? And it was very confusing to me because I was like, I really like this Sunday meeting was the highlight of my weekend. I was waiting the entire week for this meeting. Like this is the only thing I cared about. And it just was very weird. It was like very surprising and shocking to me how little other people seem to care about it and how much I seem to care about it. Like this is the only thing I cared about. And then when I met Brian, I kind of ran the same test. I was like, he was like, he had pitched me the startup, and I was like, yeah, okay, let's meet. It was actually my brother's house, the house he still lives in. We were like, let's meet at my brother's house. We'll meet at 12, right? And so Sunday comes around, I come to my brother's house at 12. Him and his brother are already sitting down working, headphones on. I don't even know what they're working on because we haven't even talked about what the startup is, but they're already working. And I go to my brother and I said, am I late? He's like, nope. And I was like, they just came early? He's like, they came 2 hours early. And I was like, why did they come 2 hours early? They said they were excited. And I was like, these are my people, right? Like that was it. Like, and look, I think it was part of me was like, I kind of figured we would be dead in like 3 months or 6 months anyway. So it's like, even if this doesn't work out, like we're all, the startup is going to be dead. So I can just find new co-founders. Like it's fine. Like I was like, whatever. Right. But it was the first time that I feel like, and actually even kind of like to this day, it was the first time that I met somebody who like took startups as seriously as I did, in the sense of like how important it was to the kind of their life. And it wasn't just a job. And it was like this thing we really wanted to do. And we just like had a lot of fun doing it. And we talked about it when we weren't working on it. And it was just like, it was kind of this feeling of kind of like, and maybe this is what Luc was talking about. And, you know, this happens differently for different people, but like, at least from a professional context, when I would like sat down with Brian, I was like, this is my people, right? It's like, he gets it. Like, he doesn't, I mean, everybody here kind of knows Brian a little bit. It's like, he doesn't really care about anything else but startups, right? And so it's like, this is kind of like my person. So my criteria at that moment was like, do they just show up for the Sunday thing? And Brian showed up. So he became my co-founder. And again, not advice I would give anybody, but there is some like element to this story of just like, and I think to what Victoria was saying, it was just like, I think if you are very serious about this and you really want to start a startup, you need to make sure that the other person is equally serious. And I think for kind of like Victoria's case, it's like Pia gave up this like lucrative other job in this other country and stuff to kind of join this startup with Victoria when frankly they had no users and no real kind of like thing. And she was like, yeah, let's do this. Right. And so I think that's important. This is one thing, Maru, you didn't ask this question, but I think it happens sometimes. I sometimes see co-founders where one is full-time and one is part-time, or like mix, or like one will come full-time if they get funding or whatever. That doesn't work. That is a red flag to me on all kind of co-founder relationships. I would never start a co-foundering relationship with anybody that was like not equally kind of like committed, unless there's like very like, there is some kind of good reasons for this, but like on the most part, it's kind of like, if they're your co-founder, we kind of like leap together. We should kind of like want to be able to take the same level of risk. And so I don't know if that's like a uniform rule, but that's something that I hear some people kind of like talk about. They're like, oh yeah, my co-founder will be full-time as soon as we get funding. And I'm like, yo, that's not your co-founder is what I think in my head. Right. So I don't know, actually, Victoria, Luc, do you guys agree with that? I guess that's like a thing that I've always had in my head, but I don't know if do you guys agree with that?
Victoria, you go ahead. For me, it's definitely a yes.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, they could have the reasons. Maybe they want to save some money until they come in full time. But I think it's also a mental thing, right? If that person is always half in, half out, his or her mindset will kind of always have that, okay, I have a safety net, so I don't have to go all in. I don't have to put all my effort into this. And sharing your brain capacity, you're thinking about your startup 100% and this person's just giving you 10%. It's not fair to you either. So I think no matter what the reason, I know Hsu Ken, you said they may have the reason. I think there should be no reason for you to jump in with someone who isn't with you the whole way.
Like there are a couple of like edge cases where I think it's okay. Like for example, you just quit your job and you have to serve out your notice period. You can't work like full time.
Sure.
But even in those cases, I think there's still a way for you to work full time. If you have to put 8 hours at your job, then what are you doing with the other 16? Like fine, you sleep and eat and whatever, right? But like if that person is working as hard as you are after working hours because like they're done with their job and then they're like gonna leave their job and like join full time, I think that's okay. I think it's less about like what state or how much hours they're putting in at the start for those edge cases. But generally speaking, yeah, you both have to be all in. Otherwise, is there like a way to prorate their equity or something? I don't know if that even exists.
Yeah, and I think I was going to bring that up too. It's just a very odd conversation. Like I'll tell everybody right now, Brian and I we've made the same commitment for every company and we split the equity 100, like 50-50 straight all the way through, right? And that's the cleanest way to do it. It's like we both leaped at the same time. It's like if I'm full-time working on a startup and Victoria is my co-founder, she's doing it part-time. I'm like, okay, so is that 50-50? Because if it is, then I probably will resent her a little bit because I'm like doing this full-time and she's like getting this other thing. And then if it's not 50-50, then it's like Luke said, it's like, okay, how do we prorate this? And like, and like longer term, even if you prorate this, it's like, okay, Victoria has been working on the startup with me for 5 years, but because she took the 3 months before to kind of not do it, now she has half of the equity of mine. Like, that doesn't, so it's just like, it's like complicated, And so I don't know. I've just always liked structures that it's like everybody's in, everybody splits it. Like, we kind of like move on from there. And having looked at the cap table of all of the startups that we invest in, the vast majority are people who've like committed at the same time. If not equal, then it's at least like very close to equal. We sometimes see like 49-51s, that kind of stuff, but it's like very close. And we do have some prejudice against investing in companies where everybody's a co-founder, but like one co-founder has 5%. And we're like, not really a co-founder, right? So anyway.
Maybe the last thing before we kind of go to the hot takes is this thing about like, having a trial project almost to work on together. Maybe we'll start with like Hsu Ken first. Like, do you think everybody should do like a trial project together? And if so, what are you like looking out for during this trial project specifically?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a tired cliche, but it probably like makes some sense, right? Where it's kind of like co-founding is kind of like dating, where it's like you kind of like build up to it, right? It's like I don't meet somebody at a networking event and then like go back and be like, we're co-founders, right? Like it's just irresponsible in everybody's case, just like, probably shouldn't go on a first date and marry the person kind of immediately after. It's just like irresponsible. So I think trial periods are a way to kind of like do this and to kind of get a feel for it. I think people are kind of very different when you're actually like during a trial period, it's like, and you're working together, you should pick a project, you should kind of work to it. And frankly, the project doesn't actually matter that much. You just need to be like working together and trying to like make decisions and all that stuff. And the stuff that you're testing for is just like, can you guys make decisions together about kind of whatever it is? Like, I mean, the first trial test is just like, what should you work on first? Like, if you cannot come to a decision about what you should work on first, like, okay, this clearly doesn't work. So like, can you make decisions about stuff? And then you also get to see some level of like the other person's commitment to this. Like Luke was talking about, it's like, if you're doing a month-long trial and I'm working with Luke does exactly what he says every single week, come hell or high water, he makes that happen. And I do not. Luke should not have started a company with me, right? And it's easy to say that you are kind of like reliable and whatever, but let's actually kind of like see. And so I think these kind of like arrangements are kind of like useful and kind of like helpful. in the past, I've kept them pretty casual in the sense that like when I've like heard people kind of work on them and that kind of stuff, in the sense of like, I don't know if I'm like just drawing up contract documents kind of like immediately or whatever, like you can kind of be, but you know, at some point you're going to want to like do that. I guess drawing up contracts is like being in a relationship. Before that, it's like you're just kind of like dating, and then you like have the conversation about actually doing it and formalizing it. But I think it's useful, and I would look for those two things. It's like, can you guys work together? Can you guys make decisions, you know, together? Can you guys talk about stuff? And then do you just find this person to kind of be reliable or not? Do they kind of say what they say they're going to do? Do they have lots of excuses for stuff? Like there's like some of that, and are you kind of aligned on that? If Luc is super hardcore and he's working like 12 hours a day on the startup plan of like every day, and I'm like 3 hours, it's probably not going to work out. If anything, I feel like people work harder in the trial periods because they know it's like a trial. And so if they don't work hard in the trial, like it's not going to get any better when they're like a thing. So, but that's my take. Luc, Victoria, what is your guys' kind of take here?
Go ahead, Victoria. I'm still thinking about like how to frame this in my.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I think trial periods are good. An example of a trial period that P and I did when we were looking for a CTO
Oh,
during
yeah.
the time, we did some kind of mini project with this potential CTO where it's like kind of envisioning how we're going to build it and all that. And this person seemed like he did not have any interest in the beauty industry, and was not willing to kind of even talk to our customers, like go to a salon, and he was just not willing. So I think even just that small test, you can already see, okay, even if he could probably build a product, but he is not willing to do anything to learn more about what we're actually trying to do, then that's a big red flag. So
maybe just one thing to add on to Victoria's part about like not talking to kind of like customers and like that kind of stuff. Maybe first of all, if you're a founder, you should be talking to customers. I don't care where your job is. And so this is like a very kind of like straightforward thing. The other thing that I would kind of say here is if you're looking for a co-founder and you're kind of like looking at stuff, co-founders tend to be people who are like kind of willing to do anything, right? And so a red flag to me is like, if I was talking to somebody about being a co-founder and they're like, oh yeah, I want to be a co-founder, but I don't do X, Y, and Z, I'd be like, don't know if we're going to be co-founders then, right? Because co-founders are like, the co-founder that you're looking for is the one that's just like, what do we need to get done? Cool, I'll do that. And if you ask them, do you know how to do that? They'll be like, nope, but I'll figure it out by next week, right? And so I think there's like an attitude piece here that maybe kind of like Victoria is touching on, where you just want to get a sense of like what kind of attitude they have towards work, and kind of like, do they have kind of like a growth mindset or not? You know, if they say they don't want to talk to customers, not going to be the right one for you. If they're like, I don't want to do sales, not going to be the right one for you. Like founders need to be able to and willing to kind of do whatever it takes kind of in the early days. They don't have to be good at it, but you need to kind of be willing, right? So maybe that's like another piece to add.
Yeah, I think there's another like way to kind of hack working together without actually working together. Just try to do like an event together.
Yeah.
Like for me and Zhan, before we started the company, we actually did a New Year's Eve party at his house. And you see everything like, all right, guys, can you bring this food? Do they bring the food? Did I bring the food? I think we bought the food. Like, that sort of thing, right? Like, oh, did they bring gifts? Like, did they, set up this game like we were supposed to? Did we actually go according to plan? And you see like things like that don't get right. Oh, damn, like we didn't get this thing, we forgot this. How do they handle that, right? How do they handle that problem? And by these like I wouldn't say it's like a mini game, but like it's like this miniature version of what it's like to do something together. You can kind of get like a sense for what it's like to work with them. And so that was pretty fun. Like I remember enjoying that New Year's Eve party with Zhan and his wife and some friends. I was like, hey, yeah, it was a pretty good party. And I'm not gonna say that like it influenced my decision, but looking back, like it probably played a factor in my calculus when I was thinking like, oh, would I actually want to work together?
This is almost I feel like the dating equivalent of this is like traveling together. It's like the first time you travel together, you get a feel, because it's like, look, you can't get away from this person. It's like you're tired. The plane ride was uncomfortable. Everybody is like irritated. Like, can you still kind of just like figure out how to kind of like work together? And so I don't know what the like startup equivalent of like traveling together is, but I think like Luc is kind of like talking about it as like, there's something that kind of needs to get done. It's going to be kind of hectic. Something's going to go wrong. Like, do you just end up like yelling at each other the whole time and nothing gets done? Because, you know, it's probably not going to be a good match.
Okay, so we're gonna have two hot takes in the interest of time because I want to open up Q&A a little bit to everyone, and I also know we're kind of like running out of time. So, okay, first one, and I think this ties in quite well with what Victoria actually said before. So, first hot take, basically, I just want you to react, you know, how you feel about this, maybe just give a quick explanation as well. Okay, so we're gonna keep it a bit like quick and spicy. So, first one, you should find a co-founder only after figuring out which problem space you're going to go after. So, you know, in Victoria's case, it's the beauty industry, maybe that's Web3. And if you do this before, you kind of risk having not the same views and, you know, interest levels in working, you know, on the same problem space. Do you guys agree? You should only find someone after you've decided on the problem space, or it's okay, you just start with whoever and figure everything else out? Luke?
Yeah, I'll react to this. Like, you don't need to do that, frankly, because your idea is going to change anyway. Like, at some point, you're like, yeah, thought we wanted to do this, pivoted away from that, no traction. So, what was the point of deciding what you wanted to work on in the first place before you started working on it? So, I think in general, time to market is very important. And so, if you're able to like jump in, validate the problem, and then move on faster, that's always better than, you know, thinking like, oh yeah, we definitely have to agree on what problem to work on. I think in general, if you have like, yeah, this is kind of interesting, and let's see where it goes, and then you get like massive market validation, people want to use you, that's a lot of motivation for people to actually want to keep working on that. So
Victoria?
Yeah, sorry, Madhu. I'm going to have to agree with Luke. I don't see this as a requirement, especially since the problem is kind of the base of what you guys will solve for. Doesn't matter if you have it before or after finding the co-founder.
Gotcha. So Ken, please kind of like disagree. We need some like
I
only if you believe in it.
I mean, I wish I could, but I'm the guy that started 3 companies in 18 years with a guy who showed up on Sunday. So clearly we had no idea, right? So, I mean, look, even iterative, it doesn't matter, but I don't know if the story's public, but Brian and I decided to work together first before we even decided to do iterative. It was like, Brian and I were like, cool, you want to do something again? Yeah. Okay, what do we do? Right? So, I mean, even for iterative, it was like, Brian and I decided to work together first, and then whatever we were going to do came after that. So I mean, I wouldn't say it's like not like it's worthless, but it's not the primary kind of like consideration here.
Okay, fine. So I struck out on that one. All of you guys kind of like, you know, agreed that that was one too important. Okay, fine. I'm hoping the next one kind of brings a little bit more controversy. So you should almost never work with someone who isn't a friend or someone you haven't known for a long time. Okay, react. Luke.
I'd say yes.
Okay.
And the reason for that is you look at all the big companies that really made it, right? The massive outsized outcomes. Tell me one founding team that were complete strangers. You probably can't. It's really tough. And so I think, yeah, you definitely have to be friends. Or like, it also depends on like what do you define as a long time? I didn't know Zhan for too long when we started a company, maybe 2 years. Like we were friends, but like not super close friends too. So like, yeah, I think it in general, I would say yes. You shouldn't start the company if you don't know that person very well.
I have a counterexample to the large company with founders that don't know each other. By the way, Luke is mainly right. The Dropbox founders. Drew Houston started Dropbox, and he found Aresh because he posted on Hacker News, and then Aresh messaged him on Hacker News. So I don't know if that counts, but it was like
that definitely counts. That definitely counts.
They didn't know each other and anything like that, and then ended up kind of like working together. So, but again, it's like one example. I think there's like many more examples that do. But anyway, I just was like, I felt challenged by kind of just like startup kind of like lore. But yes, Dropbox.
Victoria?
Yeah, well, I think Madhu, you'll be pleased because I disagree. So I don't think necessarily have to be friends or have known each other for a long time. I had a full-time job before this, and there would be a handful of colleagues that I wouldn't mind starting a company with in the future. I think one thing though that I would make sure to have, if they're not a friend or a long or have known this person for a long time, I'd make sure that I respect this person a lot. I think things to avoid in the long run if you don't really respect this person is when they give you certain ideas and you're kind of rolling your eyes at the back of your head, or sometimes they do something weird and you're just like, like, I hate you. So I think being able to look up to this person to a certain extent, that base of respect moving forward will, I think, make up for not being friends or knowing them for a
Definitely,
long
if you have contempt for someone, like you shouldn't, you definitely shouldn't start a company with them.
By the way, just to add on to this, we have done final interviews with companies and seen the contempt. So if you think Victoria rolling her eyes at kind of somebody in the co-founders is like an exaggeration, it is not an exaggeration. We've been in final interviews with companies and I've literally seen co-founders roll their eyes when their other co-founder is answering a question. So this is like very real. They don't realize they're doing it, but it's like a very real thing. It happens. It's common. So if you think this is not that common, it's quite common actually.
Victoria, you kind of made the whole event for me just by disagreeing, so thank you. I was hoping this section would be spicy. You made it worth my while. Hsu Ken, what's your take on this?
Maybe I'll give the kind of nuanced view here. I don't think it's necessary that you knew each other, but it seems to kind of like be helpful from the sense of like, hey, you kind of know this person a bit more and you have more data points. Now, the reverse of, but the opposite, not the opposite, but there's also a blind spot that comes with this. Because if you know somebody as your friend, and then you think they're smart and you respect them and all that kind of stuff, and then you working together is a very different relationship than friendship. And so I have sometimes seen founders who work with their friends and then find out that they're like good friends and bad co-founders, and that gets tough. And look, we've had it as part of the batch. I mean, I've had a couple of, and this is actually quite sad to me, there are a couple of co-founders who are like childhood friends and don't speak anymore, right? And so I think if you are going to, I think the benefit of starting a company with somebody that you know is you have more data points on them. But if you are going to do that, make sure you're like watching out for that blind spot of like, this is a person you're going to be working with and have a professional relationship with it. The primary optimization can't be like, he's fun to have beers with, right? Like that's not going to like work. And so I think that's like, you want to kind of like think about it that way. I think one thing that was beneficial about Brian and I kind of like being, Luc, I don't know if you count this as us knowing each other. I met Brian because Brian worked with my brother at a startup before, but when I kind of started working with Brian, I didn't actually know him that well, but he obviously, my brother thought he was kind of smart, right? So it's kind of like trusted kind of referral thing here.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the benefit of like having that professional relationship with Brian, my first relationship with Brian was a professional relationship. And I think that started out being the kind of basis. So we almost did it in reverse where it's like, I feel like we're friends now, but like we didn't start out as friends. And so we kind of like worked through all the professional relationship and kind of like understood each other from that first. And on some of that made it a little bit easier than like switching between kind of like, hey, we like hang out and we're friends into this professional one. It's almost easier to start as a professional one. And so I think there's lots of startups where people start out as kind of friends and then they become ones. I would bet there's actually probably more where people were coworkers on some level or like knew each other in some professional capacity and then they became startups. But no hard rules, like it kind of like works as long as you're watching for shared values and you're like all the stuff we've been talking about the past hour, then you're kind of in like reasonable shape, I think.
Okay, so we have Ina with a question. Ina, you want to like unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the great sharing so far. My question is about, some said that it's important for co-founders to work together in the same location. So what's your view about that?
I mean, Victoria's co-founder is in her living room right now. So, I don't know. I was just joking, but like, that's the part there. Victoria, what do you think?
That's a tough one. I would say not necessarily, but you have to at least be together for some parts sometimes. You can't just be away from each other most of the time because I think that also kind of builds the rapport between you two. If you're both just chatting through a screen forever. I don't think your relationship as co-founders will evolve. I'd like to hear what Hsu Ken says, since he and Brian are in different time zones.
I feel like Brian and I are kind of like, we're different here, right? Because again, we've been co-founders for like 18 years. We started a bunch of companies together. So I think in our case, it doesn't matter that we're in the same location, because we've like have so much built up kind of like knowledge about how to work together and kind of like relationship and all that stuff. So I feel like you don't need to be in the same place if you've started 3 companies together and worked together for 18 years, but like that isn't the case for kind of like most people, right? So I think our case is special case. I don't know what is the general consensus here. I think my gut is kind of telling me that like if you had asked me before COVID, I would have said 100% you need to be in the same location. 0%, like no doubt, whatever. Now I'm kind of like, you probably should be in the kind of like same one in the early days, because I think you want to build some of that like working relationship. And I think that's just easier if you're doing it in person. I think it's not impossible if you're not in the right place, but if you're in the right place, I think it naturally happens. If you're not in the same place, I think you need to be very deliberate about trying to develop that and like getting to know each other and building that relationship and all that stuff. One thing I find about remote work is that it's very goal oriented, in the sense that like you get a Zoom call, we're like talking about this, we have this agenda, like this kind of thing. And so you miss out on all the like small in between stuff of kind of like, I don't know, you see somebody in the elevator, you're both getting coffee, you end up having kind of like a 45-minute conversation, just like getting coffee, right? And I think that's like actually where a lot of relationships get built, is in those kind of like in between stages. They don't get built in like, cool, we've got an hour, we need to talk about this project, we need to decide on next. Like, that's not when it really kind of like happens. And so if I was going to do it remote, and I don't know if I would recommend it, but if I was going to do it, I would be very cognizant of like being able to build this stuff like to make sure that you're getting a piece of that. So I don't know.
I would say you definitely have to be. Like, I'm gonna disagree with everyone. And the reason for that is twofold. First, it's really momentum. And it's really just tough to replicate the excitement of like working together and like being excited about your idea if you're meeting through Zoom. And the second one is like speed. Like, you can just move so much faster if it's just the 2 of you, 3 of you, 4 of you, the same office working on something, as compared to like doing a stand-up for like an hour every day. And that's like how we started. Actually, we hired a team remotely. It just wasn't that effective. We actually had to fly to Bishkek. So I'm in Bishkek right now. Zhan is in Bishkek. We're going to an office, and the productivity is just insanely, just so much better. I can't like, it's like night and day. And that might be because like we've never handled the remote team before. But I'd like to think it's really just the power of being in an office together and just, hunkering down with the team. Like we're about to set a record for like never not missing, a sprint, which for us like in the beginning was like impossible. And now we're joking like, hey, we should like put a sign up like saying days since the last sprint missed, right? Like that sort of speed is really, really something that I think is undervalued by startups. I think if you can work together in the same office, do it, or like, with Victoria and Pia in the same place, do that. Just the speed is it's worth it.
Last question before I'll let y'all go. So Keith asked this, and I might maybe like rephrase this a little bit better. So it's related to what Victoria said very early on, which is it important to agree upfront with your co-founder on what success would look like? So to elaborate, it'd probably be like, hey, under these conditions, we cannot continue, or we should continue if we hit these certain milestones. What's you guys' take on this? We can go to Ken first.
I don't think this is important. And here's the reason kind of why. When I think you get a co-founder, and if you get a co-founder in kind of the traditional sense where it's like, hey, we're going to like work on an idea. And like Luc said, the idea has kind of like changed quite a lot. We used to always, at least amongst my friends when we were in SF, we used to call it, it's like you're forming a search party. And what I meant by forming a search party is you don't actually know what idea is going to work, right? And so if I wouldn't want a co-founder where we're like, okay, we are forming a search party to work on this idea. And then if that idea doesn't work, or the first test doesn't work, or I don't know, whatever test doesn't work, then we're all going to like disband, right? It's just like too much work. Then I got to go find more co-founders. What I'd rather do is like, I want to find somebody who is a co-founder, we're going to do the search party, we want to kind of like find something that works. We may have a general direction, right? Where it's like, I want to work in Web3, or I want to work in this space, or I don't know, some general kind of like thing. But I don't know if I would want to have that level of like, hey, we're going to quit if this kind of like happens. Now, you do want to have these types of goals so that you can gauge whether you're like working on the right idea or not. So I'm like pro these goals so that you don't just like keep working on something that's like not working. But I don't think I would like disband. I wouldn't want to like disband as co-founders if it like didn't work, right? So maybe that nuance there.
Victoria, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily important to agree upfront, just because as you go along with the startup, things change rapidly. And if you're always trying to measure the success that you agreed on earlier, it might kind of hinder you from moving forward. I think what's important to kind of screen rather would be if this person says like, this is what success would look like for me. And if we don't hit this, and I would consider this a failure and I'm out. So rather than trying to, I guess, see what success will look like from the start, maybe see what would, I guess, what values you would work towards to make this successful.
Luke?
Yes, so I think I agree with Hsu Ken wholeheartedly. You should time box your way to product market fit, to use a term that Gary Tan uses. And that's really like, how do we define whether or not we should work on this problem more? But in terms of like, okay, we're only successful if we IPO, only successful if we M&A, like really those are distractions. You should just be thinking of, are we building a product that a lot of people love and want to use? If you do that, like you probably won't have any issues. And so I think the besides like time boxing with your product market fit, focusing on like building your product, etc. The real question I think underneath this is like understanding what the end goal is, right? So do we really want to become billionaires? Is this like a family shop type of business? Is it not going to scale? I think that is important to like kind of discuss, because again, it boils down to motivations, right? If your motivation is to like become a massive unicorn, and someone's like, no, I want to like kind of grow profitably, we'll just scale this up like in a couple of cities, then you have a fundamental disconnect of like what you actually want to do. And that's where the result or like expected result kind of ties into, motivations. But if it's just like, yeah, we want to hit, I don't know, we have to be $1 billion startup in a year, we don't do that, we're done. I don't think like that's the right framework for thinking about it.
Maybe I'll just add one last thing, and then Madhu, I've got to kind of like run here. But one thing I'll add is that when Brian and I, and even to this day, when we were kind of talking about starting our startups earlier, startups, I think the primary reason we did startups was it just seemed fun and interesting. And like, that was almost the motivation. And I think one thing that maybe kept Brian and I together is we're both process people. We're not kind of like end result driven, we're process people. So we were like, this is fun and interesting, and I'm learning a lot. And what's great about that as kind of like a motivation is that that's almost always true, regardless of like whether you're actually being successful or not, right? And so I think that just like kept us going for a long time, even to like this day, right? None of my LPs are on here. Maybe they're going to be on the YouTube or whatever, but like I'm not like increasingly obsessed with like we need to be $1 billion fund or like whatever and like all that kind of stuff, right? Like it's not that interesting, actually. I think the interesting part is just like, how do we kind of like help people in Southeast Asia, and how do we kind of like do this? And it's like that whole process is just like kind of like fun and interesting. And so I think that's kind of like, if I was working with somebody and their primary motivation was I want to be $1 billion fund, that's going to be kind of like tricky for the both of us, right? Because we're going to have to make some decision down the road where it's like, we will do this to become $1 billion fund, but it will no longer be fun or interesting for Hsu Ken. And like, I'm going to be like, we should not do that. And he or she's going to be like, we should do that. And we're going to get in a very big fight, right? So I think that's kind of like a good alignment.
Okay. Thank you, Hsu Ken. Thank you, Luke, Victoria, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And everyone else on this call. If you're on this, I got to do my shill. If you signed up for this, you'll get a sign-up form to apply to Iterative. And it's got a little special something. We'll take a closer look at your application. We'll reply faster. So if you are keen to apply to our next batch, apply through that link. It should already be in your inbox.
I'll just add, Madhu has an OKR where it's hosting events and turning into applications. And so, help Madhu out.
Yeah,
Help his
me out.
OKRs. Help him hit his numbers.
I'm gonna be in trouble if I don't hit him. So, help me out. All right.
No,
Thank you,
definitely.
everyone.
By the way, just to end, definitely
Yes.
do join Iterative. Best decision of our startup's life. Yeah, definitely do that.
Look, I got that on camera, so we're gonna like post that everywhere.
Put
now.
that on the website. Put that on the homepage.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.